The Death of Slim Shady, Eminem's newest album, a particularly ambitious from him concept album, which is not something that we see him do very often. And it's also been a number of years since his last release period, so I'm excited to get to review this one. I'm Henry, and this is What Henry Says, where I give analytical reviews and my own opinions about albums. You can see the albums behind me that I've already done. I get a poster for each one, and today we're going to be reviewing this one and redoing our existing leaderboard to make it a little bit more simplified and something that, for me at least, will be a little bit more manageable and easier to understand. First, a little bit of background on Eminem, because this is my first Eminem review. Eminem was born in Detroit and had an absentee father and an extraordinarily abusive mother, which that's a theme that will appear again in this album. And he was able to make a name for himself and break out of that really shitty socioeconomic situation through battle rapping. This sort of battle rap, insult or make fun of your opponent, and scrape for absolutely everything you have and go till the sun goes down attitude would strongly influence the persona of Slim Shady, which would often appear, especially on his earlier records, who is really just designed to be abrasive, call people, especially politicians or celebrities or popular figures, out on their bullshit, and really just drive home an independent, I'm gonna be who I want to be and you can't tell me who to be narrative. Beyond promoting an independent, pull yourself up by your bootstraps attitude about life and feeding off of decades of socio-political controversy throughout his career, Eminem primarily loves his daughter, Haley, and will do absolutely anything to see her grow up as a happy individual and be the father for her that he didn't have for himself. His truly unique combination of extremely impressive lyrical talent, motivation, and controversy has led him to become one of the most popular rappers and one of the most successful ones throughout all of his career, all the 2+ decades for which he has been a rapper. And you might be saying, but wait, Henry, you haven't talked about how he's the great white hope, according to Snoop Dogg, the ultimate white rapper. And yes, that's important, and it did give a lot of other aspiring white rappers or white people the idea in their heads that yes, I can rap, and yes, I can, in many respects, belong to the hip-hop and rap community and culture. But I think what's more important about him is that kind of do-it-yourself, be your own motivation persona that he creates that also went along with the fact that he was white. Like his whiteness and growing up being bullied in elementary school, etc., kind of being put down on for trying to do this because he was white by the rap community, etc., fed into the gritty persona that helped make him so popular, and that I think goes a layer below just him being white and that visual image. But yes, his whiteness is important, and that fact feeds further the motivational narrative that he pushes forward. Knowing that M does not shy away from political controversy, this album, The Death of Slim Shady, comes in the wake of two previous albums, Revival and Kamikaze. Revival was very much about progressive political activism, and it's that mixed with a kind of motivate yourself and get yourself out of any negative emotional or life holes that you find yourself in. Now, Revival was very heavily criticized, one, because of its lack of tremendous commercial appeal, two, because of its mixing of the messages of liberal political views and being anti-Trump, but also complaining about not being allowed to offend people anymore and not being allowed to be abrasive because you're going to get canceled. And also because it was just really heavy on the politics and didn't lean into some of the other things that have made Eminem popular over the years, the controversy. Sure, there's definitely some of the motivation, but there wasn't a whole lot of Slim Shady, so to speak, and it felt a little bit more preachy than it did I'm gonna have more fun with this and try to just call people out. So Eminem made the outstanding decision of making Kamikaze, which, to quote the skits containing Paul, his agent, are about negative reactions to the criticism of Revival. A lot of artists would try to do something different after one of their albums received overwhelmingly negative reviews, but not M, because he's going to stay true to himself. So Kamikaze is essentially Eminem telling the fans that didn't like Revival what he thinks of them, which is, y'all are just essentially a bunch of complaining, whiny people where the album didn't say what you wanted it to or do what you wanted it to, so you're going to come back and complain at me that, oh, you missed the old Eminem. But this is really me being me and doing what I want to do from an artistic standpoint, so why do you have to go and just whine and complain about that? And Eminem adds on to that by saying, I'm still the best rapper to ever do it, and that just means I get to do what I want to artistically. I have enough of a legacy behind me that I'm going to do what I want. And look, I'm not saying that's a bad thing objectively. I'm like, it's great that he wants to stay true to what he artistically wants to do and what his vision is. But that definitely just goes to show you who Eminem is as an artist. He is not afraid and is not going to back down. That was bad, not afraid. But he's not afraid, and he's not going to back down from anybody and let anybody limit what he wants to do as a rapper. Now, both of these albums, of course, involve and really heavily channel the persona of Slim Shady. Not as much in the being socially abrasive and vulgar category, but in the, I'm going to do what I want, I'm going to be who I want, and you can't stop me from doing what I want to do and saying what I want to say. And so this album, The Death of Slim Shady, if the title wasn't clear enough, is really a reckoning with what that persona means to Eminem, the good and the bad that it's brought him, and where he wants to go from here. So that's a pretty good introduction to M and what this album is going to be about. And if you want more background on Eminem, watch 8 Mile. So this album begins with the song Renaissance, which means rebirth in Italian, a fact everybody knows because of middle school, and we'll get to that in terms of thematics and concepts in a second. But essentially, this is Eminem spitting, and again, we'll get to that in a moment, and then saying, essentially, I'm going to keep being who I want to be. Y'all can't silence me. I'm still the best rapper to do it. I've got elephantitis of the nuts, as he says, and you're going to have to wait till you're dead for me to stop being me. The next track, Habits, really establishes the narrative in the album where Slim Shady has kidnapped Marshall Mathers, Eminem, and has made him take something that will hopefully, in Slim Shady's eyes, get M fired up and turn him into Slim Shady again. And Eminem doesn't want to do it. He doesn't explain why, but likely because he doesn't want this album to turn out like the last two, and he wants to be a little bit less just throwing all the Slim Shadiness, all the vulgar, explicit, unfiltered opinions. But Slim Shady says, nah, man, I'm gonna spit it how I want to spit it. I'm gonna be offensive and insulting and go full force. And he kind of gets a little bit of self-awareness where he says, this shit is addicting. Like, I love this. I love just being as abrasive as possible and rubbing it in people's little eyes like coarse sandpaper. The next track is kind of a shorter skit-like thing called Trouble, where Slim just goes full force into channeling being as offensive and abrasive as possible, not even really making a point, just making fun of the blind, the deaf, and the paraplegic. And Marshall's like, dude, goddamn, like, chill, that didn't even make any sense. And Slim's like, nah, man, you don't get it. Like, you need this drive. You need this just fiery, burning rage within yourself. And that's what I represent. The next track, Brand New Dance, is actually exactly that. It's just this goofy, dumb, like, semi-groovy, pop-ish imitation about a new dance called the Christopher Reeves, where you paralyze yourself, and that's the joke, because Christopher Reeves apparently looks goofy paralyzed. And do you feel really messed up for laughing or chuckling at some of his humor? Yes, and that's the point. Slim Shady is supposed to represent this kind of, I'm going to say things in a very literal and obscene way, and you'll laugh at it, and that should tell you a larger point about the world and also something about yourself by giving you a space where you can laugh at this and be this obscene and vulgar. That's, I guess, the larger conceptual point of Slim Shady, and that's kind of the larger point that this track is trying to make, even though very much on the surface it doesn't sound like it's making any other kind of larger point. The alarm clock then goes off and Eminem wakes up screaming, and the next track, Evil, continuing our narrative, is the aftermath of that. Eminem waking up from this weird Slim Shady fever dream and saying, damn, I think the part of me that just can't see the world in this sunshiny, happy way and has to just rage at it and point out all of the hypocrisy and strange contradictory things and idiosyncrasies in the most vulgar, straightforward way possible, kind of just has me questioning my sanity and thinking, like, if this is a part of me, what does that say about me? The next track brings us back to our fever dream internal conflict setting with All You Got, where Slim Shady in a skit just is dragging Eminem along and tells him, look, man, I am you. Like, I am the real you. I might be really abrasive, offensive, etc., but I made you successful, and I give you the drive to be as good a rapper as you can be. And I can't believe you would just walk away from me like that, so I'm forcing myself back into your life. The next track really builds on this idea with Lucifer. It plays off of the idea that Slim Shady is just the devil because he calls all of these people out on all of this stuff and talks about whatever he wants. And there's sort of an undercurrent here of, if I have to rebel this hard against cancel culture and go this hard after people that just want to shut me down and social media that wants me to stop talking, I really must be sort of like very different and abrasive and maybe not that awesome, but still me. The next track, Antichrist, as one might have guessed from the title of the previous track, builds off of these themes, but with more social and political issues that Eminem chooses to comment on here. He really just reiterates, I'm going to be abrasive, I'm going to be offensive and vulgar, I'm going to say what I think in the way that I want to say it, and I will spare nobody. Because, in a sort of self-identifying way, that is, or at least part of, who I am. The next track, Fuel, features Dreamville rapper JID, and here JID is really talking about how the darkness of growing up in impoverished Atlanta can lead you to a dark state of mind where the power of words, the power of rapping, and the art that you do doesn't really seem as powerful as using weapons to get what you want and kill people. Eminem follows up on JID's work by taking a sort of turn from how the album has been going so far. He says, yeah, from that day that I met Dre, from my upbringing in battle rapping, I too have that kind of deadly fire and fuel and motivation. And if you test me and want to push me, you are going to get obliterated by bar after bar after bar. So what are y'all gonna do if I don't run out? If I keep being motivated to be who I am? It's not like y'all can stop me. Road Rage returns to the Slim Shady-esque theme that we've been used to seeing on this album, this time being mainly a criticism of what Eminem perceives as a refusal from many obese or overweight individuals to own their obesity or overweightness and instead victimize themselves. He also briefly discusses the transgender community being pro-transgender rights, but also wanting to have a more nuanced opinion about some of the finer details of that overarching issue without getting canceled, which he feels like he can't do, and expresses frustration there. All of this sort of pointing to Slim Shady doesn't necessarily want to get canceled, even though sometimes he says that he does. He more so just wants to be able to say what he wants to say, even if not everybody would agree with it. And you can think of that what you will. Houdini is, well, number one, it was the promotional single for the album, but number two, it's the full-on return of our original Slim Shady, the extremely offensive really just vulgar individual who's going to say some really screwed up stuff that you laugh at because of how screwed up it is. And that's essentially what that song represents. He also points out that if that old Slim Shady saw the way that the world is today in terms of what he would label quote-unquote political correctness, he would say that the world is too soft and can't take a good old joke. We then get a brief breaking news skit in which the Detroit media covers that an artist has released an album that involves him trying to cancel himself and how bizarre that is, and people outside Eminem's restaurant boycotting him. And this is kind of just Slim Shady having completed his work, where I'm back, look, we're enraging people, we're getting canceled, this is what we need to be, this is what we want. I'm an emotional arsonist, we're gonna revel in the chaos. We then are treated with the climactic track on the album, Guilty Conscience 2, which is a sequel to the much earlier track in Eminem's career, Guilty Conscience, where he navigates making a bad decision versus making a good, better choices and self-resilient choices, and ends up making the bad choice. Here, this is really Eminem having it out with Slim Shady for re-canceling him in this sort of make-believe fever dream world, essentially, where he says, dude, like, sure, you were the guy that helped me make money in the beginning and just got me popular for being abrasive, but the truth is, you're an asshole. You make victims out of people that don't need to be victims. You get me involved in a bunch of silly beefs for the sake of your own selfish pride. And I don't need you anymore. I can be myself and be my own person and have my own thoughts without having to just shit on everyone and unload a bunch of lyrical rounds into people. And Slim Shady's like, what are you talking about? Like, this is totally who you are. This is the entire artistic identity that you've made up. And in the end, they fight, and Eminem ends up killing Slim Shady in the stream, and then he wakes up. The next track, Head Honcho, features Filipino-American rapper Easy Mill, and is essentially a declaration of, I am a lyrical assassin. There are various references to the Hitman franchise. I'm a lyrical assassin, I move with precision, and everybody expects me to create this insane god-tier level project every time I release an album on the part of Eminem, but I'm still so good at this and so fluid and etc. that you're gonna be a stand for me until I die. The following track, Temporary, comes back to Eminem's really central, at the heart, overarching musical theme of caring about his daughter Haley and wanting her to be happy. And on the subject of death, around which this album orbits, he says, am I really afraid of death? Not that as much as not being able to communicate what I want to say to Haley before I leave, and not being able to lay the scaffolding for her to have a really happy life. And so this track is essentially saying, hey, if after I'm gone, you can be strong, you're a soldier, you're tough, and you'll get through it and be really happy, and this song will be here to guide you through the grieving process. The track Bad One sort of returns to the abrasive, critical Eminem that we've seen through the whole album, but what he's really pointing out here with Bad One, which is a reference to bad albums or poorly critically and popularly received albums, is he's saying, either way, I'm sort of screwed. If I stick with Slim Shady, then you'll say, wow, you're too offensive. How could you say these horrible things? And if I go away from Slim Shady, you'll say, oh, you're washed up and you aren't the same rapper that you used to be. So either way, it's going to end up being a quote-unquote bad album, so I'm just going to stick with who I am and let that be what it is. Toby, the next song, is a collaboration with Big Sean and Babytron, and is essentially a reaffirmation of, I am who I am, I'm proud of this person that I have become, I'm not going to feel guilty about it, and I'm one of the greatest rappers of all time, if not the greatest rapper of all time, because there's a real case for Eminem. Then we have the Guess Who's Back skit, which features some misquoted lyrics from Houdini and a kind of grittily said, or I guess gravelly is the word I'm looking for, said, parts from one of the earlier skits where Slim Shady is more powerful, and it kind of shows that the overwhelming fear factor and vulgarity and hateful strength of Slim Shady from earlier in the album has gone away now that Eminem has reasserted who he is and who he wants to be without the need for just spewing hate all over the place. So then we get the final track on the album, Somebody Save Me, with Jelly Roll. And this track is essentially an alternate universe ending or alternate timeline ending in which Eminem is still addicted to drugs and can't get his stuff together and misses out on the people that matter to him's lives, like Haley's marriage, etc., because he just can't get together and he's stuck with pills, and that's the only thing that's worth anything to him anymore. And eventually he dies and he's being lowered in his grave, and that's the end. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, wait, what the hell? Why did we go through all this narrative and then end with some kind of weird alternate universe ending? Which is kind of what I was thinking the first time I listened to this album. But if you play then the beginning of the album over again, you begin with Slim Shady spitting on Marshall's grave. Or I guess it's not clear that it's Slim Shady, but it becomes clear in the next track. Anyway, you get Slim Shady spitting on Marshall's grave. So, in essence, he gets buried, and then it's Slim Shady spitting on that grave. In essence, we thought that Slim Shady, the version of Eminem who is vulgar, abrasive, hateful, is willing to just ruthlessly victimize people for the sake of financial gain and being a successful rapper, and just pissing people off generally out of this kind of fun, twisted habit that he has. We thought that he was finally dead and put to rest in favor of a new and improved Marshall Mathers individuality, but in fact, he's still around. So what's the deal with that? And that is essentially the concept of the album, because Slim Shady is not going to die. He is going to continue to resurface as the original part of Eminem, that motivation that helped to make him successful and that drove him to find his voice as a rapper and as a battle rapper very early on in his career and in his life. And so what Eminem has to do now as an adult and as a more mature person is manage Slim Shady. Slim Shady's going to come up, but he's going to remind himself, hey, I'm a better person now. I'm no longer a drug addict. I no longer feel this hate and anger towards the world. And I'm going to bring back affirmations as to who I really am. And then Slim Shady's going to come up again, and I'm going to have to do it again, and we're going to have to keep managing these parts of ourselves. So the death of Slim Shady is not his actual death, the actual, I guess, amputation of that part of Eminem, but no longer allowing Slim Shady to take over and control what Eminem says and does on a regular basis. It's like Eminem said in Habits with addiction, which is what makes Habits such a good follow-up to Renaissance now that we know that it's kind of Eminem's addiction coming back, not only in drugs, but in the Slim Shady persona of hating and raging and being socially abrasive. Do you ever not become an addict? No, your brain is still wired to be that way. You just learn to manage the addiction in such a way that you can still be who you want to be and live a super fulfilling and great life, which is what Eminem wants to do, and chiefly he wants to create that better sort of life and parental structure, continuing an ongoing parental structure, mainly staying alive, for his daughter. Now, before I give my verdict on this album, we're going to redo the leaderboard, and I think it's important to talk about how I'm going to redo the leaderboard, because I think my previous rating system of a bunch of 10s and adding the score up and noting the different criteria that the albums have to meet to be considered good, I think that was a really good rating system in terms of how comprehensive it was, but it was complicated and it was hard for me to really just let how I feel about the album come across, and I think it also led to me considering the album so hard in those aspects that I found good things about them because I'm a generally positive person. And I think it led to some just generally high ratings that might need to be looked at again. So we're going to start by doing that. We'll start with Section 80. I think that Section 80 is a really, really solid and creative conceit for what life is like for the men and women born into Compton and Section 8 housing in the late 80s. I think that while some little tidbits of the women's views are antiquated, I think that including them that heavily and focusing on some of their struggles specifically is very nuanced and not as heavily hit on for its time. I think a lot of the music is not only fun to listen to and very creative lyrically, but is also inspiring in terms of getting you to take your past pain and trauma and move forward in a way where your past experience helps and reinforces your positive identity now. And for that reason, I think it's a great album. I would give it a rating of great. Graduation is a unique combination of positive messaging and extraordinary commercial success. Some people would say that it sounds antiquated today, but I don't really think so. I think it was both very sonically ambitious for its time, and it still sounds like a pretty sonically ambitious, really well-produced album. And I also think that it still features that ambitious younger Kanye who's really talking directly to the person listening and trying to get them to understand, like, you can do this too if you really can put your mind to it and get into that creative space where you can become the best version of yourself and graduate from both past that might not be super great, but also from the person who used to be, who wasn't as driven as he is on this project. And I think for that reason, it's pretty great too. I'd give that a great rating. JID's The Never Story also has a kind of really ambitious, time-critical optimism idea behind it. I think a lot of the rap is really good and really image-heavy, and while some people would say it's mumble rap, I don't really think so. I think it's just very syllabically and lyrically creative and just happens to be pretty fast in cadence a lot of the time. I think that with an album this focused on its message, with a message that's that kind of precise and the finer point it's trying to get at, it needed to be, directionally speaking, pretty tight. And I think that tracks like Ed, Ed, Nettie and Underwear kind of stray away from where the album's going a little bit and don't really contribute as substantively to the points being made as other tracks do, like maybe 8701. And for that reason, I'd call it good plus. It's also not quite as musically refined as The Never Story, which I think really gets it to the heart of what Jid wants to say as an artist more so. And I don't mean that as a like, I'm rating this by comparing it to something else. But like either way, I would still end up giving it good plus. Evanescence's Fallen is musically pretty awesome. I think that Amy Lee's vocals are fantastic. I think that it deals with some pretty real and pretty gritty stuff, aside from its reputation as being like, oh, for like whiny teenage girls. I think it deals with some pretty like real and heavy things and heavy topics and has positive messaging. And while one or two of the songs like Tourniquet might fall a little bit flat and directionally it's not perfect, I think it generally gets its point across to a point where most people would understand it, and for that reason I'll give it good plus as well. Austin by Post Malone. I still think that from a pop standpoint, this is definitely him at his most comfortable. I think he's found his pop musical style, his cadence, his rhythm, the kinds of topics he wants to approach, and the lyricism that he wants to go after. I think the album is a little bit bloated. I think similar to Fallen, it wavers a little bit more than I thought in my first review in terms of its messaging. Laugh It Off does a really good job of rounding that out though. And overall, I'd call it good. I'd say it's good as a project. I think some songs like Speedometer are kind of a ugly redheaded stepchild, and you get some acoustic guitar songs where it just sounds like he's just playing the acoustic guitar and singing some really reverb, like, drenched vocals over it, and it's not the best sounding thing. And Texas T is a little bit odd too within the rest of the album, but again, generally, album is good. Songs like Something Real hit really hard, and the themes get pretty complex, so it's good, I think. Kendrick Lamar's Damn, an extremely ambitious project that aims to capture not just cyclical experiences with ego death, but also tackling just some of the largest aspects of life in general, and how we and different people will encounter in our lives will choose to deal with all of those things, and even down to the brass tacks of lyricism and word choice. The album differs depending on whether you listen to the track list forwards and backwards, and it takes some very nuanced approaches to all of the big, bold letter topics like love, lust, DNA, like what makes up a person, and tries to make some kind of organizational sense of life. I think, especially with the respect of tracks meaning different things or having different takes on the same topics, depending on whether you listen to it forwards or backwards, and that being a kind of capturing of the complexity of human existence, I think it does a very good job. Some of the tracks are a little musically deadpan. Like, I wouldn't consider Ya to be a very fun track to listen to, but I think as a piece of art and as a piece of music, it's very well done, and I'd call it great. Lastly, Downward Spiral by Nine Inch Nails. I don't have the poster yet. That's probably coming. This Downward Spiral is, again, an extremely ambitious concept album that tries to cut at the heart of overcoming or failed attempts to overcome this fundamental self-hatred that we can draw from negative experiences and poor coping mechanisms. I think it deserves a lot of applause for its delving straight into some of the really gritty and nasty aspects of those things, like addiction and lust, and just the depths and delusion that self-hatred can reach, and the actions that can lead us to take. I think its largest flaw is that it is just that hard to listen to. Like, it's really, I know it's not really designed to be enjoyable, so to speak, and it's not. But I think as artistically sound as it is, and as amazing as the production is, and as just sweeping of an epic of self-destruction as the whole project really is, it's also really hard to engage with. And for that reason, I'm going to give it a great. It borders on outstanding with just how well rendered from a production and a lyricism and narrative standpoint that Path of Self-Destruction is. But because it's so hard to engage with, and it's a little bit negative facing, it's not as balanced as I'd like it to be, it gets a great. And that brings us to this project. I think it would be really easy to focus on like some of the middle tracks like Lucifer, Antichrist, Road Rage, and just say he's complaining a bunch about all these different groups of people and all the perceived inadequacies that he comes away with. And this is just him on his third straight album ranting and raving about cancel culture and about how people want to shut him down for having viewpoints. And I think it's easy to get lost in that and to sort of miss the overarching point or concept of the album, and that's that Eminem is moving to a more mature and adult place with the Slim Shady piece that's a part of him, and he's going to continue to regulate it over time such that he can continue to say what he wants to say and be honest about his views or even just about his own artistic expression in his music and make the music that he wants, but not feel like he needs to just blow people out of the water in wanton, offensive, vulgar ways just to appease his fans or make money, or because that's what he's supposed to do now. He doesn't feel like Slim Shady's this demon he is in a perpetual fight to exorcise. And I think that's what the concept of this album is. The death of Slim Shady is not the death of the character, which is really a part of Eminem, but the death of the alternate universe takeover Slim Shady, who just drowns in this kind of vulgar, obscene, no responsibility, runaway train, self-hatred, and drug addiction that ends up with him not being the role model for his daughter and for the rest of his family that he wants to be. So as the cycle of the album indicates, Slim Shady will always be a part of him, both the drive that led him to have a superstar career, the hunger to express himself and make his voice heard, and the pain from coming up in super impoverished absentee father Detroit, trying to make a name for himself, like trying to have anyone care that he exists, really, through battle rapping and that kind of directed, targeted lyricism. And M is going to take these past experiences with this drive and this pain and channel them into being genuine, but maybe being a little bit more nuanced and being an honest artist, but an artist that feels less compelled to just go off of the chain. And I think that's also part of what he's getting with Temporary. What he wants to get at is he wants Haley to use the pain of his loss to help herself become a better person in overcoming it, and not letting the hate and the grief just consume and destroy her. I think there's a similar sort of point going on there. To word it another way, Slim Shady, the alter ego, will always be a part of Eminem. It's part of who made him what he is now, to Slim Shady's point in the skits. But that raging, inflamed Slim Shady aspect, that mental, hating, painful drive that used to push Eminem in this direction to just spew it all over the place, is temporary, like any emotion, and perhaps it's gone now. Now, I do see a few problems from a narrative standpoint in terms of the album. I think that, to the point I made in the very beginning of my review aspect, it is easy to get lost in all of the specific group criticisms and hypocrisy pointing outs that happen, and you kind of lose track of is this Slim Shady or Eminem talking? And you could argue that some of that is intentional, but it does also kind of take away from the narrative we were given at the beginning. And then I think after Guilty Conscience 2, from Head Honcho through Toby, on first listen, it's hard to kind of know what's happening. Why are we just kind of saying we're still the best rapper, and then moving into Toby where we're still the best rapper, and in between those talking about how people didn't like our earlier album. It's the way that I explained it when I had more time to reflect in the track list portion, it made more sense. But especially on the first few listens, on that impressionable side, it can be hard to figure out what's really going on there, why those tracks would be there, and I still don't know that either of those sections are perfectly placed. Another criticism that I could levy against this album is that while there is a pretty clear message in terms of Eminem saying, I'm going to trend in a different direction in relation to Slim Shady, when you call an album The Death of Slim Shady, and it's very unclear whether or not anybody dies, the listeners could almost view that as a kind of bait and switch letdown situation. It took me a little deal of time with the album to sit down and say, okay, I think this is what's going on with the death of Slim Shady, the rage bait concept, versus Slim Shady, the persona. But I think without that kind of extra time spent listening to it, this could definitely be seen as a Chekhov's misfiring gun situation, and that's problematic. Aside from a fairly limited scope and a little bit of trouble with the direction and overall conceit and execution of that conceit within the world of the album, I think the lyricism is fantastic. I think that we get hit with some hard-hitting vulgar shady, which is what a lot of the fans were waiting for, but I think that, again, it goes deeper than that in various ways, and Eminem's ability to just technically rap and make words go together and rhyme sentences is impeccable and is on full display here. From a skill standpoint and from a lyricism standpoint, this album is pretty damn awesome. It also has a very good degree of listenability. It's funny. A lot of the humor lands, even if you're not completely down with a lot of the social criticisms he's making or the clapping back at his enemies. There's still a good deal of humor to go around. A good deal of the instrumentation works and is fairly creative. I wouldn't say it's like blow you out of the water production value, but it's not bad either. And so I think that listenability also lends itself to album quality. I would call this album good. There's a pretty compelling and nuanced narrative about becoming more of who you are, becoming a more genuine person and a more honest artist within this album. You just have to work to find it. And because you have to work to find it, in part due to direction and narrative and concept flaws, and due to the overdoneness of social commentary and op clapback, I would call it good and not great, because it definitely had the opportunity to be better than it was. That being said, I think for Eminem, this is especially ambitious. The lyricism and what people would expect from Eminem in terms of why you'd buy an Eminem album, all of that is on point. And I think that it's a fitting chapter within the Eminem chronology and a solid movement in a new direction. Thank you for joining me for this review, and I will see you all for the next one. Thank you for your continued support of the channel.